Mendel was a young priest in the Augustinian monastery in Brno, and he worked as an assistant teacher in the gymnasium in Znojmo, because he was not really very good at the parish work. He was much better at teaching science. So it was required that he got certified as a teacher, and for that reason he went to the University of Vienna and took an exam. And unfortunately he failed. He got some rather harsh comments by his examiners. So then it was decided by the abbot of the monastery, by Cyril Knapp, that Mendel should enroll at the university as a student to get a formal education in the sciences, to be better prepared for a second take for this exam. And that's what he did. He went to the University of Vienna to study there. The Vienna of the 19th century was a city of large contrasts. Poverty was abundant, and for the majority of the population, life was a struggle for survival. Neonatal mortality was very high, so many children didn't survive the first year of life. But at the same time, Vienna was a city of art, a city of culture. Many of the famous composers, everybody knows Beethoven and Schubert, they did their work in Vienna during the late 18th and 19th century. These contrasts existed in Vienna. They were a part of everyday life, and Mendel arrived in Vienna during these times. He arrived here in the autumn of 1851, and just a few years earlier, in 1848, there was a revolutionary movement that gripped many of the capitals in Europe. The citizens and students took to the streets. They demanded democratic rights, and they demanded a constitution and an end of censorship. And the working class people demanded higher wages. So these revolutions were largely beat down, and there was no real overall success of these revolutionary movements. Apart from the educational part, there was an educational reform put in place following these revolutions at the University of Vienna by the Minister of Education back then. His name was Thun Hohenstein. He ended censorship of professors' writings at the University of Vienna, and he introduced scientific institutes and scientific seminars. And he made the students part of the research community. So rather than just sitting and listening to lectures, the students became involved in research. They became part of the research community. And in 1850, Thun Hohenstein hired a number of promising new professors who did experimental work in the natural sciences. He hired Christian Doppler, the famous physicist, and he also hired Franz Unger, the botanist. And both of these new professors became very influential teachers of Mendel. When Christian Doppler became the director of the new Institute of Experimental Physics at the University of Vienna, his health deteriorated fast. He suffered from a lung disease, and still he put all the energy he had into building up this new institute and building up the teaching at this new institute. So he invented a famous course which was called Demonstration in Experimental Physics. Mendel attended this course during his first semester at the University of Vienna. And in this course, the students were demonstrated experiments, so they were shown experiments, but they were also supposed to conduct their own experiments themselves. So each of the students needed to pick a research subject and had to conduct experiments and conduct their own research, collect their own data, and then write up a research report. And this was a very new way of teaching because it involved the students in research. Mendel was influenced by these courses. He learned how to rigorously conduct experiments, he learned how to analyze data, and he learned this mathematical approach to the natural sciences which the physicists were capable of. Mendel also studied various subjects in biology. He studied botany, he studied geology, he studied paleontology. One of his influential teachers was Franz Unger, the botany professor, Franz Unger was a plant anatomist, but he also was an evolutionary theorist. He was also interested in the extinct plant world. He counted number of species that appeared in various geological periods, so he had actually a quantitative approach to understanding the change of the presence of these groups through evolutionary time. And this made him argue that species are not constant in their properties, but that species actually change through evolutionary time. So he had this idea of common descent in his writing. He expressed evolutionary ideas. This is quite remarkable because this was a few years before Darwin published The Origin of Species. And these ideas were of course controversial, and Mendel was exposed to those ideas. Being a Catholic priest himself, this was certainly an interesting situation, being a student of an inspiring teacher who lectures about controversial evolutionary ideas and at the same time being influenced by his own Catholic background. Mendel read Darwin with a lot of interest. He had a copy of The Origin of Species and he made lots of comments in this book. But when he read The Origin of Species, he had already started conducting his experiments on peas, his famous hybridization experiments. So despite the fact that Darwin, of course, taught him many lessons, it must have been his education in Vienna that inspired him, that equipped him with the necessary skills to conduct his famous hybridization experiments. And eventually he took the teacher's certification exam once again. Historians seem to know why he didn't actually pass it the second time. It seems that he had something like a nervous breakdown, so he was unable to actually take the oral exam, which meant that he didn't pass it altogether, even at the second attempt. Despite the fact that Mendel did not succeed in becoming certified as a teacher, he was one of the most famous scientists in biology of all times, and he went back to conduct these experiments that invented a new field of research. He's the father of genetics, so his experiments had far-reaching consequences for biology and for biological thought at the time, which keep inspiring so many biologists today and founded the new field of genetics.